Hi everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion. So our topic for today is navigating between greenwash and greywash, and we're going to be discussing how to optimize value and avoid the common pitfalls of corporate sustainability. I thought I'd start very quickly by defining greenwashing, because we don't just consider greenwashing to be a problem for comms and marketing. I think greenwashing has moved on a lot from being considered as false claims and false advertising, and it's really moved into the investor, the shareholder, and the regulatory space. So that is changing the level of scrutiny, and it's changing the breadth of scrutiny for companies. So that's greenwashing. What then? What on earth is greywashing? So greywashing is a term that we coined at Salterbaxter, I suppose for the opposite of greenwashing, but it's something we're seeing a lot of. So if greenwashing is creativity without any credibility, then greywashing is the credibility without any creativity. So it's technically correct sustainability strategies that are on the right issues with the right level of ambition, but that are so dry and discreet and dull and technical that no action will happen as a result of it. So it's strategies that are credible, but that lack the inspiration, that lack the call to arms and the accessibility for everyone to feel that they can contribute. And I suppose from where we're sitting, both greenwashing and greywashing are holding up progress in equal measure. So I'm joined by some amazing panelists. We've had such a great time preparing for this discussion, and I hope you have as great a time listening in. They, amongst them, provide a really holistic view of this big topic, coming at this from a business, from a governance, from a standards and frameworks, from a benchmarking, and from a youth perspective. So we have Dorthe Scherling Nielsen, whose background really is navigating business and politics and civil society, and works at the interplay between corporate governance and culture.
I hope I can translate my holistic perspective into some helpful insights on the pretty significant challenges that companies are facing in this space. Just a few words about me. I have 20 years of international experience in the fields of sustainability, government affairs, business development, and positioning. And in my capacity as EVP of Corporate Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer, I have developed and implemented global strategies. I was previously with Nike, Vestas, Bestseller, and Hempel, and I also worked for the U.S. Department of State and lived 9 years in the U.S. I've now established my own advisory where I offer services as an independent board director, executive advisor, and speaker. I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I'm originally from, and I look forward to a great conversation today.
And Eivind, you're Chair Emeritus for SASB, and you're an advisory board member, and you have the most amazing expert perspective on the development of standards and frameworks.
Thank you for hosting this, Kathleen and Salterbaxter. It's an honor and pleasure to be with you. Yeah, I'm Chair Emeritus for SASB, now the ISSB. I'm a strategic advisor for JP Morgan Sustainability Equity Growth Fund, Bain & Company. I'm also co-owner of my own fund called Roberts Capital Advisors. I teach a little bit at Columbia, University of Denver, and also write a little bit about sustainability. So it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Lauren Musa, you work for the World Benchmarking Alliance. I will let you introduce them to everybody. Definitely worth looking up the WBA, and you focus on the roadmaps to 2030 goals. So I think you're looking at how investors translate data into the expectations of companies, which will be a valuable perspective as well.
So indeed, I'm working on the investor ecosystem here at the World Benchmarking Alliance, really focusing on questions of how investors, but even broader, the finance ecosystem has leveraged to influence real economy companies. And we benchmark these real economy companies in these free and publicly available benchmarks that are available for anyone to use, and they're across 7 sustainability themes. I've had a little bit of experience, or I guess a decade of experience, really don't want to underplay, in the ESG space, both in Europe, and now I'm sitting back in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. My background before joining WBA was at ING, where I was the human rights lead, so really working on banking and the social topics, but now going a little bit broader into the finance ecosystem and across SDG themes.
Monica Dwight, you beautifully described yesterday the role of youth as pushing for change harder and faster, and I thought that was the most brilliant setup for you. We're so excited to have you with us.
I was formerly a United States country coordinator for the United Nations COI 16, which is the youth version of COP26, where I got to lead youth engagement efforts to create a statement of youth policy document, which documented the youth priorities to address climate change. I like to work at the intersection of people and sustainability, so striving to think globally and act locally. And in my 9 to 5, I work at a public sector sustainability consulting communications group called Circle Point, where we do projects throughout California, and I'm based in San Francisco.
And Brigitta Witt, you are a sustainable business insider. You've led corporate and ESG functions for nearly 2 decades. It's great to have you with us.
Yes, I have been in the field for, as you say, almost 2 decades. I led and actually really built the global ESG function at Hyatt Hotels Corporation, and then most recently joined T-Mobile about 4.5 years ago on a very similar mission, which is to really take what had been, several nascent programs that had been built up within T-Mobile and build them into a holistic and strategic ESG function for the company broadly.
Jaclyn Allen, our head of North America, you've been on both sides. You've been in-house and working with us in an advisory capacity. So you've kind of got the best of both perspectives.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jaclyn Allen, Director of North America for Salterbaxter. And as Kathleen mentioned, have also experience working in-house for an international fashion brand. There's sustainability strategy and reporting work. Also experience working in public affairs on the public side of and coalition building and stakeholder engagement as well. So we're knowing that 68% of US CEOs have admitted their companies have been guilty of greenwashing. And just as sustainability evolves every day practically, so has the practice of greenwash. We have misleading claims, but then you also have the generic claims that are celebrating your successes in sort of distracting from perhaps some of your shortcomings as a business. And this is now being seen as non-disclosure of embedded risk. You're not disclosing things that might be an issue and only highlighting those that are positive to your company. Do you think companies are really getting their heads around the fact that greenwashing is bigger than just unsubstantiated claims these days? It's really a bigger topic area.
I'm not fully sure companies are fully getting their heads around the complexity of greenwashing and how to combat it. And again, the centrality of disclosures, to bring it back to the work of WBA and what we do across the 17 benchmarks we now have published, is we look at how companies are doing on these SDG roadmaps and themes, which are the benchmarks themselves, but based on their public disclosures. And if you look at the results of our benchmarks and where companies are at, it's a bit of a depressing picture, to tell you the truth. So disclosures are just not up to snuff, and they're not there on these themes. I'd say it's hard for anyone to know what companies are doing without meaningful disclosures, of course. Meaningful disclosure, again, takes a systems thinking lens. I can't, mention that and repeat that enough. So it takes that to really to understand what is expected in terms of these themes like governance, ethical business conduct, climate, etc. But then it takes acting and explaining to the outside world really, really clearly the why and the how you are doing the things that you are. So if we don't fully understand who companies are and what they do, there's really no way to hold them accountable and to unpack whether or not they're greenwashing or not. You need the transparency and meaningful disclosure. I would say that there is no accountability in a black box of these generic claims or shiny stories that aren't really put into context, really in a crystal clear way of the why and the how you're making the choices you are.
I think more and more as the industry around ESG is evolving, as companies are evolving around ESG, and as regulation has really increased, the risk of greenwashing has grown, right? And so I think, sure, a lot of CEOs or CSOs are probably looking at what they've done and said, am I at risk here for being called out for greenwashing? And I think that's a positive thing and a negative thing. If you look at companies that are truly intending to drive change and are making really bold claims and aspirations, in my view, as long as those are legitimate, right? If those truly are goals that the company tends to achieve, may miss, right? But, you know, I think it's a balance, right, between not squashing ambition and industry leading boldness, while at the same time making sure that what you're saying is quantitatively achievable until otherwise proven wrong.
I think in our previous conversations around this, there was a lot of talk about, you know, what do we do for companies who, like, central to their business model is something that is inherently challenging for the planet, right? Or inherently challenging for climate change. Like, what do those companies do? What do oil companies do in the face of, you know, addressing climate change and also continuing to have a business that functions, and continuing to have the infrastructure and like cars that we need for now to continue to have our lives, right? We can't have like EVs just flooding through the world tomorrow. So how do we continue to navigate the relationship with businesses that, you know, might be creating emissions and also maybe are also pushing forward in other ways on kind of, you know, on pro-climate policies or pro-climate actions. I know that a lot of youth definitely are like, you know, we shouldn't take any money or do any sort of kind of fraternizing with any companies like that. And also, you know, I think there are also youth that, as we kind of get further along in the timeline towards 2050, towards any of these important policy goals that we've set, people, I feel like a lot of youth have shifted more towards kind of the narrative of, we just need all hands on deck. It doesn't matter. Let's not discriminate in this way. Let's have conversations in these gray areas around how we can move the needle forward on addressing the climate crisis. And so I think that narrative has shifted a lot in the last 5 years. I don't think I could have said that 5 years ago about youth. I think before it was much more black and white, and now there's much more gray area.
I mean, if you really want to reduce wash noise, political noise, and regulatory noise, you know, we really need a sustainability accounting standard in place. I mean, think about 100 years ago when we had no financial accounting standards and company A, B, and C were reporting any way they wanted to. They were making up the profit and loss statement. They were making up balance sheets until investors said, hey, listen, I think I'm being cheated here. What's going on here? And then we got the SAC established, and we got the Advisor Act established, and we got standards, frameworks within accounting established. And we're going through the same thing now within sustainability accounting. We're in the adolescency, but it's moving very, very quickly from sort of a voluntary regime to a mandatory voluntary to a mandatory. So I think one thing is sort of, we don't need another 3-letter abbreviation. We don't need, you know, another sort of concept. We just need the standard and framework to be put in place. The other part is that, you know, what Monica was talking about, a double materiality, or the impact companies' products and services have on society. That is not something really investors look at today. We call it financial materiality. What we focus on and what Monica talked about is double materiality. But we do realize that double materiality can become financial material. Take a beverage company that produces sugar drinks. Obviously, they have a responsibility for diabetes in society. Those drinks are probably produced in plastic bottles. We know that plastic waste has a cost to society. You take all those externalities and bring it back to a company's balance sheet, it's going to have a huge negative effect. We also know that this company also produces jobs, produces a lot of positives for the whole supplier value chain. So you have to take these negatives and positives and do this impact accounting. I think that's a little bit into the future. It's nothing we investors look that much at today. It can become financial material, but today it's really about getting financial materiality in place first, and getting corporates to use the standard, making sure that this becomes legislated, and that we get it implemented as a global baseline throughout the various jurisdictions we have globally.
Yeah, no, that's great, Eivind. And I think disclosure really helps with accountability, which then of course helps sort of limit the greenwashing and educates everyone on the technicalities of what they're saying.
To the counter of greenwash, we've got, we've got this disclosure pressure, we've got the fear of greenwashing, we've got the multiple polycrises, we've got an economic pressure. And what we're seeing across the board is that this is creating short-term action and risk aversion. So I suppose that's where we really fall into the greywash camp. And we see a lot of this. We see a lot of sustainability strategies that are technically correct. They're on the right issues with the right level of ambition, but you'd need a doctorate in environmental science to understand what those ambitions even are. So there's a kind of technical language jargon. Whereas we're all agreed that what we need is every employee, every stakeholder turning up and thinking, I understand this, I can help contribute to this, and this is part of my job and my mission. So we really see greywash as equally harmful and as a massive missed opportunity. So I think many of these bold ambitions that exist will never be delivered on if we're greywashing. And that's kind of holding up progress. So Dorthe, I would love to get your experience and your views on this.
So I think it's hugely important that we don't let perfect get in the way of good. And that's also why it's really essential that companies not only highlight their progress, but also speak to the challenges they encounter in a credible and authentic way, because I think that really resonates with audiences. At the same time, I do understand that some companies err on the side of caution, and that it results in a missed opportunity. And I think part of the challenge here is that there are many different standards and voluntary initiatives out there, and it is a bit of a jungle. We're often comparing apples and oranges. And I think part of the solution here is that we need a comprehensive and effective regulatory framework. And here I understand there might be a different mindset depending on which side of the Atlantic you're located. In the US, there is a tendency to regulate less compared to Europe. But I do think it is worth mentioning that the EU is currently working on the eco-design sustainable product regulation, which will include specific environmental metrics that companies need to adhere to make claims on their products, as well as regulation around labeling. So hopefully that can also help alleviate some of the fears that companies have in terms of the reputational and financial risks. I also think that it's very likely that parts of the EU Green Deal will have a spillover effect to the US. I don't think the US will adopt the EU regulations formally, but I do think that US companies operating globally will look to the EU for inspiration and also to stay competitive in this space. So it won't alleviate all fears, but I think it will go quite a long way. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on European regulatory developments.
Obviously, I can't speak for all youth. Every activist, every youth person is different. And I think there's a lot of activists and youth that would say, well, why aren't you meeting your goals? And be really critical and very hard on them for not having done it. And there are other youth that might say, okay, well, you shot for the moon, but maybe you landed among the stars, if you will. But I think generally speaking, there's a trend of wanting more honesty and wanting more authenticity. So I think the flip side to that is like, how does it feel right to like punish people for being honest if that's truly what's happening? I think that transparency and authenticity feels very real for especially Gen Z and young millennials to build the trust, because there has historically and a lot of times continues to be a lot of distrust among corporations, especially in the United States. And the reality is that there definitely will be youth that are saying companies are not doing enough. And even though the domestic and international guidelines say, we need to be here, we know from the science that we really need to be here. So if we're not even meeting these guidelines, what are you doing? But I think that ultimately it's fruitful to reward the honesty, because that's what continues to feed the progress. And that's what continues to feed the willingness of companies to participate in these conversations. But I definitely want to acknowledge the friction between business and activist expectations, because yes, youth are pushing harder and faster and want so much. And I think that's because it feels like the stake in the game is very, very real for us. But I think that I would encourage business to see this voice as not so much as an inconvenient one, but more of a necessary voice in the conversation.
I think this is so important what Monica's saying. I think the boomers, I probably represent we are an obstacle. You know, we have a antiquated belief system. So I think to really get society moving forward and corporates move forward, we need to get rid of the boomer generation as decision makers and have the Gen X, the millennial, and the Gen Z will eventually take over. And so I think this is just about demographic, not just, but it's about demographics, and it's about, you know, getting the boomers a little bit more into retirement and having their antiquated belief systems retired for good.
I don't know if I'll speak so much to the creativity and credibility balance, but really bringing it back to the similar advice I'd have for greenwash and greywash would be that understanding the societal expectations on your business well, having clear targets and metrics to back up the sustainability efforts and disclosing them is a good start. Again, I'm just repeating myself from even previous responses, but I want to paint the picture of reality that we see a really big gap here in practice. So, for example, an upcoming theme, we know that companies are now starting to look at the topic of biodiversity, and there are some really comprehensive and shiny strategies out there on mitigating biodiversity loss. But we also know under the newly negotiated global biodiversity framework that the main expectation on companies, it's now clear again under a global framework, is that companies are expected to measure and disclose their impacts and dependencies on nature. But companies are not focusing on this. Essentially, WBA has a nature benchmark, and under that benchmark, we can see that 5% of the companies we assessed understand their impacts and dependencies on nature and disclose this. So only 5%. And that does make you wonder, what are these, for example, shiny biodiversity strategies? What are they containing and how do they hold up if they're not really unpacking what the expectations are and what you're being asked to deliver? So we do have a long way to go in terms of the credibility of our efforts.
I think we've talked about navigating the regulatory landscape and greenwashing on one side and greywashing on the other, but at the heart of this, and you've all touched on this in different ways, is how do we create the urgency needed to transform at scale and at pace? So very, very briefly, could you each give me a 30-second bit of advice for our participants? So Lorgen, how would you create urgency?
Urgency is out there in the external world, so we have all the external arguments. There's no excuse to know we should be acting, but maybe the place to start is really, while we're waiting for regulation and frameworks, to really capitalize on what's already out there. We have the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The Paris Agreement has been translated into science-based targets, methodologies for sectors. The work at WBA can be used really an action roadmap, not only looking at disclosures, but a way to plot the future forward. So just start with what's already there and start moving.
Something we say all the time is we need to meet people where they are. So I think that means looking at, like what Lauren's saying, what we already have out there. We know, thinking about New York City's air quality today, how do we highlight that and make it relevant for folks who think, I'm actually not part of this, or this is not something that's relevant for me, and really bring it to the forefront to connect the dots and provide the opportunities to storytell so that it is relevant and creates tangible, actionable items for folks to get involved in the crisis.
I think the future of financial accounting and sustainable accounting is that it will be audited, regulated in one package, and they'll be reconciled. So we'll have one package. We could give your 10K or equivalent. It'll be one audited package. Number two, I think the banks who finance emissions, they have to help corporates in their transition planning, making sure the cost of capital and access to financing is there. There is tremendous opportunities in the private market when it comes to decarbonizing technologies, decarbonizing industry, real estate, transportation, and our food. There is huge opportunity. There's a lot of capital going into decarbonizing technologies. So I'm quite bullish that there's huge investor appetite to change the way we work together today in dealing with the very, very important climate change issues.
I am going to put all my eggs here in Monica's basket and say, and also what Eivind said, which is the people that are ruling countries today and corporations are so out of touch and self-centered in terms of the way that they're directing their energies. I think Eivind's right. We got to get the boomers out. We got to give real voice to young people who are going to inherit the mess that so many of us have created. I can't wait to see when this youth movement, this true accountability to people making decisions today on behalf of them, when that really starts. And if it starts, and when it does truly start, I hope it's a real reckoning, right? I don't know how else to do it these days, and with the exception of to change through accountability, and that accountability usually happens through voting.
Building on what Brigitta just said, looking at it from an internal perspective, I think accountability is key to drive action and create urgency. And also, as dry as it sounds, good governance is your best friend. Really nailing roles, responsibilities, and accountability will make a big difference. When people are accountable, they are invested. And of course, also tie remuneration to ESG performance, not just at C-suite level, but throughout the organization, because sustainability is everyone's job.
I think, one of the themes from all of this is that the only benchmark that really matters is the future, whether that's looking at it from a youth perspective or the planetary needs. And I think anything less than that makes no sense. So I think from our perspective, it's really saying that the only benchmark that matters is the future, and to prioritize, because one of the things that you have all touched on is the amount of disclosure, regulation, and things to be across. Sustainability teams are far too small. It needs to be an everyone job. And with that comes prioritizing. So we've been working on different tools to do that, because we've recognized the need to be able to say, how far am I away from staying in business, from creating a sustainable future? Where can I embed? Where can I empower? And then how do I prioritize?